Welcome back to the second panel session. And I'm just excited, okay, because this panel session really is perfect in their special needs. So I think very often the mindset behind having a child with special needs is, so many challenges. But what we seek to do in this panel session is really to transform the mindset and to come up with solutions of what parents can do, not just for our own children, but to create a more gracious society at large. Yeah. So celebrating their challenges as gifts is what we intend to do. Do send us your questions if you have any. And with that, I want to introduce you to my three lovely ladies. So let's start with Tina. Tina Tan is the Vice President of Spark Singapore, which specializes in ADHD and ADD. Yeah. And then over to Dr. Debbie, who is a friend, so a familiar face definitely on my different panel sessions. She is, I would say, a specialist with autism. Correct? And the founder of Brainworks Singapore. So later we'll hear how she cured her, or rather, okay, I'm thinking about how to say this correctly. So if you have a friend who has autism, the truth is autism is known to be a condition for life. This mother refused to take what the experts told her, traveled 10 years across 8 countries, and today her eldest is really normal, and I think that is a story worth sharing about. Yeah, and then we have Suli as well, who is an educational psychologist with Promises Healthcare. Yes, so each who is going to share very distinct, and your specialty will be dyslexia.
All the different special educational needs and learning disorders. Yes.
Yes. So send your questions in as we start. Yeah. So where I want to say is, I believe that every child is a gift, even if they are not like the mainstream, right? And the purpose of today's segment is to create awareness, empathy, and skills, not just for our children, but widespread, yeah? Because the reality is Albert Einstein, Leonardo, I mean, we can go on, Picasso, John Lennon, Steven Spielberg, Richard Branson, Steve Jobs. All these are people with learning disabilities who were even expelled from school for Einstein. And look at the geniuses that they truly are. And my heart is if we can begin to embrace our special children, not as a nice term to just say they're special, but to really speak into their full giftings, they would really be such huge contributors to our society. Okay, so today, I think for the purpose of this, I'm going to use the 4 A's, okay? I call it, so let's start with the first A, awareness. Let's talk about the signs and symptoms of each. So Tina, if you can share with us, what's the difference between ADHD and ADD?
Okay, actually, technically speaking, there's no longer ADD in the classification, it's all ADHD. However, ADD is more the presentation, right? Those who are not so hyper, so they don't have the H in the name. However, their hyperactive natures are more invisible, right? So it's actually internal because all this ADHD is a neurodevelopmental thing. So their symptoms will be there. It's just that you may not be able to see it. Yeah. So even for ADHD, the older the children get, they actually calm down and they find more invisible ways to be hyperactive. You know, like instead of shaking their leg and the whole body move, they twiddle their thumbs, they pinch something, they scratch themselves, or they peel, you know, something really quietly. Adults still do that all the way, but they just don't move because they realize when they move, people look at them, you know.
It's not socially acceptable, correct. So they make the action smaller.
So the ADD ones are those who already started with not the visible outworkings. They don't get up and walk around the classroom. They are the dreamers, the drifters. Yeah? But then it doesn't make the condition any less presenting in their life. So the ADDs ones will be the one that you say they don't reach their full potential because they don't have seemingly presenting needs. They're not disruptive in the class. They actually pass their exams, but they're just not meeting their potential because they could, if someone were to, hey, are you paying attention? Or like, hey, teacher just said this, you know, write down. If they had just a little bit of that, they could actually score maybe 10 marks more, 15 marks more. They could remember that tomorrow is an exam and actually bother to study half an hour today and then get 10 marks more, you know. So these are the ones that just fall through the cracks because they're doing okay. So they may not even get the diagnosis, right? The ADD ones.
Yeah. Wonderful. So what you're saying is ADHD, I mean, to use the correct term, are children who, in my opinion, have a Ferrari mind with bicycle brakes. Yes. So their minds are so powerful, but the brakes, you can imagine, and so there's a huge disconnect.
Correct,
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. And if we were to move on to Dr. Debbie, let's look at autism. How would I, as a parent, guess that this may be signs of the spectrum, because it's an entire spectrum?
So first thing that is very, very obvious is the lack of social interaction muscle. It can be verbal, non-verbal. The verbal one, you can really see some children doesn't really speak. And the non-verbal eye contact, they will grab your hand to do something instead of telling you or looking at you. Then they will have issues with repetitive movement. It's either they speak through it. It can be a question that they ask over and over. It can be a phrase from the movie or from the song that they keep on repeating. It could be a sound that they keep on saying. It could be movement. It can be jump. It can be a twitch. It can be something that repetitively done. And then other thing that is very, very obvious is the sensory issues. Some of them have issues with their eyesight. Some of them have issues with their hearing. They could be like covering their ear all the time, or they might have issues with hypersensitive. Like for my son, once he had his hand caught in the door, and then he didn't even feel it. He didn't cry. He didn't make any noise, and like when there is something fell by his side, he didn't even flinch. So it can be hyperacoustic, can be someone who can hear like the thunder from like miles away, you know. So all these things are the telltales of children with autism.
Wonderful, thank you. So what I'm hearing is one, physically is jumping on the sofa and everything, you know, being very hyper. The other one is more social, right? And with repetitive actions. For externally looking in.
Yes, and some of them actually have like big movements. And those with big movements, they can be really scary for people around them. It can be seen as aggressive. Well, I will tell you later that all these things are ways for them to take care of themselves.
I understand. And thank you so much. I think with that knowledge, right, I understand why. There was once I was talking to someone, he came so close to me, Suli, I was shocked. Should I back off? This is a stranger. But, you know, having this knowledge, right, helps me understand that it's normal for them. While our social distance boundary is like that, that was before COVID. Understanding that for them, it's not intentional. It's just, to him, talking to you close is something that he likes. And it's a positive sign because he's comfortable. Help me to, like, not push them away mentally. Yeah, so thank you for sharing that.
That's right.
And SU-LYNN, I want to bring up, when we talk about science and awareness, a lot of parents know dyslexia. But a lot of them don't know about this disability with math, or you know the difference. So can you share with us the different conditions?
Yeah, so even dyslexia, right, it's actually a type of specific learning disorder. So under specific learning disorders, we have things like impairments in reading. So that's what we know as dyslexia. Which is really about, reading, how accurate the person's reading is. And with reading accuracy, it means that you will need to have good phonological skills, right? Phonological processing skills. That means like letter sound recognition and things like that. I mean, we need all those skills in order to know how to read. And then with reading, we have to be fluent in our reading as well. With reading fluency, then that helps us to comprehend what we are reading. And of course, for people with dyslexia, many of them will also have reading is decoding, so writing out is actually encoding. So normally they will also have spelling difficulties. So that goes on to another kind of specific learning disorder, and that is in written expression. For some people, we know that to be dysgraphia. That's another term that is commonly used. So in dysgraphia will be, where a child may have difficulties spelling, writing continuous sentences. So they will have difficulties in like punctuation and grammar. Clarity and organization of their ideas, putting it into writing could be a difficulty for them. And then the next one is the specific learning disorder in math, impairment in math. And in math, you have, there's like so many skills, right? You have the basic numeracy skills. So for people with difficulties even in that area, that's what we do know as dyscalculia. That's really in the number sense, the number bonds like 2 plus 3, 5 plus 5. And then of course, it becomes a lot more complex, fluency in how fast we calculate, how accurate we calculate. And then problem sums. Problem sums takes so many steps. First of all, we have to first understand what the question is asking for. Now, for some people with dyslexia,
English,
yes, that's right. I mean, we have seen the PSLE questions. That's right, that's right. So for children with dyslexia, some of them do actually struggle, not so much with the math actually, but it's more about understanding the problem sums. Whereas there are also another group of children who are struggling with the math reasoning skills. So yeah, I mean, these are all the various main specific learning disorders.
Thank you so much for sharing that, because I think often when parents don't know, we can come across as like, why are you so lazy? Repeat 3 times already, still don't understand. And then because it's so easy for us and we don't understand, seeing through their lenses, their years and their experience, how difficult they are trying their best. And then we fault them for not reaching certain standards that we have externally imposed, right? So let's move on to the next one, where I talk about attitudes, right? When I talk about attitudes, I think for a lot of parents, when I have a child with ADHD, the automatic attitude is, not one of celebration, but one of, handful to deal with. How am I going to keep up with their energy? How do we shift their attitude towards their own child? And, for example, a neighbor's child?
I think the interesting thing is that most of us are not ADHD. So when you look at an ADHD child, even if it's your own child, you sort of go, ayo, this type of child, you know what I mean? Like the one who doesn't listen, right? The one who you say already, still going to do. All the one that will embarrass you, right? That is the type of child. And now you got ADHD. So I think parents need to come to the acceptance that children are not just the exhibition of their behaviors, right? Like even if there's supposedly naughtiness, what is behind that? I think sometimes as parents, we react first because we are embarrassed. We feel we're disgraced. Like I say to the child, don't touch that in public in the shopping center. But obviously, somebody's really good child will listen, but ours will just go and touch or go and do. And then next moment, you have to extricate yourself from the shop. Yeah. So you're like, how am I supposed to be proud of this type of child? But we need to realize that they don't thrive in these environments. So they don't thrive in the shop. They don't thrive in a mall. Bring them to the field, bring them outdoors, bring them somewhere creative. And I tell you, suddenly you will see they're the only one with the creative and the clever idea. They are able to solve a situation, when everybody else is complaining or in crisis mode. Because actually they are the ones that think on their feet. Because when they have that dopamine rush, then they suddenly become creative. But when they're in a boring setting, when they're in this place where they cannot touch things, but of course they want to touch and explore, they're going to be told, don't do this, don't do that, So I think parents have to realize it's also a person-environment fit. When your child is different, find them and put them in an environment where they really flourish.
I'm hearing and I'm just smiling, right? Because I can imagine how our Singapore environment doesn't serve them because of the lack of space constraint that we have.
Yes.
Yeah, but if we had so much more outdoor nature time for them, that's where they are in their element.
Correct.
Instead of feeling like a bull in a china shop, cannot touch this, cannot touch it, but it goes against the nature of who I am, and I'm like,
and they run to the China.
and then the huge scolding, and then the guilt, the shame, and then the next day it happens again, right? Because that's the nature of who I am. I didn't ask to be born this way. This is who I am. So let's create environments where they feel accepted. I think that's very powerful.
That's right. I think running out in the grass field and things like that, right? It's like, that's the moment that they're going to flourish, right? And at the same time, we're talking about, because the myth also is that people with ADHD cannot focus, but actually that's not true, because there are moments where they can hyper focus. So perhaps in a grass field, right, when they see something like a caterpillar or a ladybug, they'll probably be sitting there and just staring, and suddenly you're like, oh, they are actually very focused on something.
Yes, you're right.
I love what you say, because there's so many misnomers, right? We think, we categorize, and then we just label them as such. But I think it's really the expense of energy that they have. Right? And I think when we can begin to say, hey, do you know you've got a Ferrari brain? And it's more your bicycle brakes. Let's work on your brakes. How do we strengthen or tighten your brakes such that socially it's easier for you and for others, right? But for who you are a celebration.
Yes, actually, interestingly, there are a lot of studies nowadays that shows what is the brakes. The brakes are inhibitory neurons in the brain. and a lot of them are lacking in these inhibitory neurons. So you can't really fault them for not having the brain, because that is what happened in the brain.
Okay, and perfectly said. So what can we do to increase the strength of the brain, so to speak? Because for you, when it comes to attitude, right? Amazing, right? People say, autism for life. Let's teach you coping strategies. You rejected that and went out in search for a solution. Yeah, so can you share with us what you did? What was your alternative solution that brought health and wellness back to your son?
So firstly, why I actually took that step out, because they are my children. If I were their doctor, I'd probably tell the parents that, you know, that you need to be able to take in this fact, and then this is something that you need to live for life. But the thing is that I am the mother, and then if I were in a situation whereby someone told me that my children will stuck where they are, they will not going to move forward, they're going to have that difficulties all through their lives, I will fight for it, because they are my children. I'm that one person that will not give up on them. So what happened is that when I actually took that courage to went out of my comfort zone and see what's out there, what are the people doing, you know, I started looking at all those people who wrote books, who actually do talks about possibilities of helping them. They are magnets, so I just went to them and learned from whatever things I was like the person, or like the dog underneath the table. I was just really looking for that crumbs to look for answer for my kids. So I went to so many different places to actually got that kind of idea. Okay, what are the things that people are doing? So back in the 2010, the biggest thought was metabolism. There's something wrong with these children's metabolism. So I started looking at that and learning about it. Then I learned also, at that time, I found people who studied about the brain, and I learned about it as well. And afterward, in the 2013, 2014, I got to learn about the gut and how important it is to have a good gut, good and non-inflammatory gut that actually can help the children and then help them through nutrition. So there are so many actually studies that shows children with autism are found to have more inflammation in their gut and in their brain, that many people overlook that. And if we just focus on getting them to be healthier, physically
right?
healthier, there are a lot of things that will change in the way they learn, in the way they function. Of course, very important to have the right attitude as well, because parents who are not bombarding their children, parents who are more accepting, parents who are loving without any expectations will likely have caused the children less inflammation.
Wonderful. I so love what you're sharing, because when you talk about inflammation, I can imagine from a layperson, if my body, because our body is intelligent and it's sending so much resources to deal with the inflammations, it's no wonder there is lesser resources left for the, inverted commas, mainstream or normal functioning, so to speak.
Exactly. Even a child who is born without all this condition or doesn't have this condition, when they live in a very stressful environment, and the parents keep pushing them, doing something against their will, they will also get inflamed.
I hear, because then we are triggering the amygdala, right? That literally is fight, flight, fight, flight.
Exactly.
And we do it unknowingly. And our brain has, while we have evolved, our brain is still less evolved in you know, so much tension in it was used to serve us, right? When I see the tiger, fight, flight, so I freeze and my body tense up, you know, my skin becomes poisonous, so that even if the saber tooth bites me, it's bitter to their taste, right? And I'm all ready. But then in today's time, Bing! I see a WhatsApp only. The same
the tiger.
responses. That's the equivalent of a tiger. And can you imagine last time tiger maybe once a day? Okay.
Yeah.
Now like 20 times a day. Hundreds. Oh my child, don't run. Husband. And then we are like boom, 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 boom. And it's no wonder that there is the rise of real illnesses like cancer or a lot more conditions that we never had the name for. I think it's really stress provoked. Yeah. When actually we
Very
can
related.
learn how to just relax. And that's actually one of the giftings, I think, of children, or we call them special needs, because in their presence, actually for me, I learned how to just be. I literally slow down. It's just, I don't know, it's their aura or their energy. I'm forced to just slow down, right?
Exactly.
Where things don't matter anymore. So that's one of the greatest gifts I have when I talk to children in whether of the spectrum or ADHD. And SU-LYNN, if you can share, right? Like, the gifts, right? Actually, they are a lot more imaginative. They are very intuitive. They are
very insightful, very creative, like what Tina mentioned. Yes, that's right. I mean, usually I will come from the approach, of course, that every unique individual has their own strengths and weaknesses. It's just that all too often we are always very focused on the weaknesses, right? So like what Tina mentioned, for a child with ADHD or even any other specific learning disorders like dyslexia, I've seen so many of them being so creative. Sometimes they have a lot of ideas in their head and they can verbalize it very well. But of course, their difficulty, if it is putting in writing clearly, that's their difficulty, right? But they can be really great artists. You're just showing us also pictures of your daughter's drawing, right? Really great anime, wonderful pictures with a lot of details and things like that. So, really for some children with dyslexia or ADHD, generally they are also very big picture, very visionary, great thinkers. And I think, like all the names that you rattled off just now, all the famous people, so they're really great thinkers. I do have many clients that I work with, also teenagers or youth. Either they are going to college soon or starting a junior college, right? So they will have project work and things like that. So I will always tell them, in the project work, in the project team, they're probably likely to be the ones that are going to be coming out with all the great, wonderful ideas. And that is where they will need the help of their teammate, perhaps to scribe down all their thoughts. And this is where, like, for example, for a child with autism, right, typically, they're really, really very good at looking into details. They're very meticulous. So they are the ones who are going to catch all the mistakes, all the small things that we are doing. They are also the ones who are going to bring across a really different, unconventional, but very logical. It's their own logic and it's not wrong, right? It's a different way of thinking and a different way of gathering insights, actually, into particular matters. So I would say there's just so much strength out there. It's really about, like you mentioned, celebrating and embracing the gifts.
And I love one thing that stands out really is they are a lot more curious than the normal child, right? Because they are, and because I think sometimes it's a gift, right? Because I don't really care what other people think of me. I'm able to just go deep into what I want to and explore and to push and to question when nobody else does, right? Nobody questions and just follows the herd. Wow, so I think that curiosity is increasingly one of the skill sets that we would need in the future, because that is where we have children or the next generation that will push the boundaries of what's possible.
Yes, and I think with the curiosity, that's where we are actually having the joy of learning, right? We are interested in something, we are highly motivated. Actually, it's the level of motivation that we are trying to get out of the child, and actually not just the child, all of us, right? That's exactly what we will be very passionate about in our life.
Wonderful, wonderful.
And I think that Dr. Debbie talked about lack of the inhibitors, right? Actually, it's the very thing that there's no inhibition. That's why they're curious. That's why they ask questions and that's why they take risk. Whereas the more neurotypical learner is like, oh no, I cannot ask this. I cannot think that. Like,
I should not do this.
Should I touch or not? But this one is just touch, think, create, dream.
And then
of course, someone else will have to say, okay, maybe not this, maybe not that. That's why you talk about teamwork and all that. But yeah, so the very same deficiency can actually be a strength. So that's what we talk about reframing, right? When you reframe the weaknesses and see the strengths, then you realize that, hey, we do need to tap on this because society needs it, you know, especially when you come to crisis levels like COVID and all that. You need problem solvers who can think out of the box. You can't come up with a problem that's only within the procedures and within all the risk-taking, you know, behavior, right? Yeah.
Wonderful. I love what you say. And moving on to acceptance, right? Or rather expectations. Because you alluded to it slightly earlier, where very often for a child with ADHD, I'm in a shopping mall, and then suddenly my child, you know, how do we remove societal's judgment or labels on this kind of behavior? What is a mindset change that we can begin to share with parents or even our viewers to begin to empathize?
Yeah, I think I always have this, when I do like, you know, awareness talks, whether it's with educators or even a few times we did with secondary schools, you know, secondary school students, teenagers. And I say that, you know, at the end of the day, we want to have society that doesn't judge, right? We want to have more compassion. So it's not just about ADHD or autism. Actually, it's about a whole society thing, you know. I think somehow in Singapore, we're a little bit uptight, you know, and
A
you know,
little?
even a little, yeah, a little bit. Like in the MRT, right? Someone doesn't stand up and offer their seat. They look well dressed. They are, you know, they don't look pregnant, you know, at least not 6 months. You know, and then we judge, like, oh, you know, look, she's trying to fall asleep, you know, look, you know, and then people, you know, if disabled, they need to go and get a tag and say, I am autistic or I am disabled, so I need a seat. You know, like, can we just not judge? Like, maybe someone's having a migraine, someone's having an internal breakdown that they're desperately trying to go home because they're having a mental, you know, nervous breakdown, or they're having depression, right? Anxiety. All these things, don't put a label and say, you know, I look so anxious or I'm a panic attack. Because ADHD is like that. They look perfectly normal physically, but it's all the internal things. So can we not judge? Even with parenting, right? I mean, I was there, okay, when my children were young, and because I was also brought up with that, you know, philosophy that if that's my child, you know, a few tight slaps and a few whatever, it will not be my child, right? And then your own child does those things, and you're like, you know, what do I do?
No.
Correct. Yeah, no, it doesn't work also. I did try it before, unfortunately, but yeah, so I think we have to sort of empathize before we judge. And like, why judge? I mean, who are you? You're God. I mean, like, we don't know, right? We don't know what happens behind the scenes. We don't know whether this is the 100th time the parent has tried to come out, and they've already has system structure, and they're trying to integrate the child to a restaurant. Maybe this is a family gathering, you know, see the grandpa for the, don't know, you know, once a year outing, and every other day of the whole year, this child is cooked at home because they're disruptive. You know, let's just not judge, right? We don't need a backstory, right? We don't need, I think all this thing is also popularized by media. We don't need to know a sad backstory and then we suddenly go, wow, so compassionate, no, so empathetic. I think the real heroes in society are those who don't need a backstory and they are compassionate. And they offer mercy and they offer time and patience and just go, it's okay, you know? All right, even if this is a terrible parent with terrible parenting, so what? Is that my job to go and judge you and give you the eye, you know, and make you feel even worse than you're feeling because you're already, you know, having an issue, right? Yeah.
And I want to say it really goes a long way, a kind word. Because I remember at my place, there was this boy who woke us up at 7 a.m. in the pool. And it was so loud. And then after a while, and I just let it be because I didn't know much. Was I irritated? Honestly, yes, because I was sleeping, right, that weekend. But then one day when I went down and I said hi to the mom looked at me and there was so much apology in her eyes. And she said, you don't mind, my son is autistic. And in that moment, right, I just fully understood, like what you say, the backstory, but why do we need to understand or even have an excuse or reason to, okay, now, okay, for most people, this is my tolerance level. For you, it's going to increase because, you know, but why don't we just, our baseline be always like that, for even if we don't understand. And to also give a kind word, right? Like I may not even know the stranger, but to just say, how are you? Is there anything I can do to support you? Not out of pity, but out of just empathy, right? Because too often we can grow in being gracious. So even Dr. Debbie, if we were to talk, how do we shift mindset such that we can create and encourage a more gracious society?
For me, biggest time that I actually had a change of mindset, I will tell you a little story. During the time that one of my second child, who is severely autistic at that time, he climbed out of the window of the grill. So we were living in the 8th floor in the condominium. he went out of the grill and he was out there for I don't know how long. Then when I actually found out that he was there, it was the moment in my life when I got him back. I decided that I would rather have him with me with all his iniquities rather than not having him at all. So I know that for people, changing mindset is really, really hard. For me, I need to have that such drastic measure for me to actually change mindset, to just love him as he is. So I would say it's really hard to just ask people to accept them and just love them. Because as a mother, I also have trouble loving him and accepting him as he is. At the time, he was like smearing poop everywhere in the house, and he was throwing things out of the balcony. And during those times, I was so angry with him most of the time. But when that happened, I really changed my mindset and just love him, because if I lost him, it's going to be something that I couldn't think of. So how to make people accept them is to learn to love all these people, to love them where they are, so that they have enough grace to accept and encourage and to just be gracious to other people. Because these people might not have seen grace, might not have been touched by others' kindness, might not been accepted when they need it. So we live in such an environment, like in Singapore, it is so prevalent that everyone felt so unloved, unaccepted, being included in in situation that they actually become very ungracious.
It's like, I so totally get what you're saying. It's like in Singapore, there's so much competition, you know, whether it starts at school or in workplaces, that it's me or you. It's a zero-sum game. There is no collaboration. There's no us. A lack of we kind of languaging is me versus you, us versus them. There seems to be that line. But if we can just erase the line completely and see us as one human race. And I hear what you say. I think the reality for a lot of us is sometimes something drastic has to happen. It's like, you know, this is our lives and we're living happily. And when something, boom, hits us, then it shatters our whole worldview. And then that is where something opens up for us to say, hey, maybe kindness, and actually research has shown, is one of the greatest virtue. Because when you extend kindness to someone for no reason, it's actually a reflection of you. It's not about whether the person warranted it to begin with. It's about your choice in being a creator of your spaces. It can come across as a kindness, acceptance, a kind word to someone else. So thank you for sharing that from your own life story. And even I think sometimes society, right, even with dyslexia, I mean, I don't have friends. No, don't have, they're okay. Parents don't even want to have it tested because there seems to be some mental stigma.
Yes. I mean, in a lot of the parents that I have come across, right, and I also do know that there's a lot of difficulties, a lot of concerns and worries going behind their minds as well, right? But definitely it does stem a lot from this fear of stigma. And also the fear that their child will be seen differently. So for example, I do have parents that tell me, you know, for example, so the parents may come into the clinic, right, and because they're seeking an assessment, which is good because we all want to really understand the child's profile of needs, right, where his strengths are, where the child's weaknesses are, and then so that we can support them better. And then the next question sometimes would be, okay, then can I not share this with the teachers? So then of course I'm like, but why not? And a lot of times what I hear from the parents is that they are afraid that the teachers will see their child differently, maybe blacklist the child, and a lot of these of course are just concerns that the parent is having. So at the end of it, I do feel that it all comes down to also the parent themselves having to advocate for their own child. And it starts off by first, being aware of their child's needs, accepting the child's needs, and I know that's a journey in itself. And then it's also to educate everybody else about what kind of support that your child requires. You know, no one is alone, right? Even as a parent, there's a need also to collaborate closely with the school teachers We have actually come a long way as a society. Yes, back then in the past, like what Dr. Debbie mentioned also, so I do have a brother with a physical disability, with cerebral palsy. And when he was really very young, I didn't know any better, but I was with him and he was walking around in crutches. And I remember I was in the lift and then a parent was telling the boy, if you're naughty, you'll be like that also.
Whoa.
Right? There was no context given whatsoever, but she said something like that. But this was many, many years ago. I'm talking about at least 20 years ago, 20 years plus years ago. Yeah. And so definitely we have come a very long way. Definitely we are a lot more inclusive now than before. So, that being said, actually many of our schools, many of our teachers, they are very well aware of, special educational needs and the general type of support that can be given to children. But of course, it does take the parent also, right, to really work hand in hand with the teachers. Not just teachers, but also around the parents. I mean, you have family support, relatives. It really starts with actually sharing and educating everybody else around you, right? And with that greater exposure, with that greater awareness, that's how society also learns about what inclusion is, about how we can all support everyone better.
Something that I picked up in what you were sharing is there's something wrong. As in, from a parent's perspective, as I look at my child, if I come from something is wrong, there is that natural shame, guilt, the whole range of emotions that's attached, and the need to want to then fix my child. But if I come from everything is whole and perfect as it is, and not from something right or even wrong, but just throw that away, I think it creates a very different space for me to interact, believe in my child, and to call forth their potential.
That's right.
Yeah. So I think parents, like if you have children with ADHD, or if you witness, neighbors or friends, instead of saying, oh, there is something wrong, just throw away the wrong or right, catch it, throw it away, and then look like, how do I interact and connect with this child, with this parent who probably doesn't have an easy time being supported? How can I be that support, even if it's a 15-minute interaction time? I think that is something that we can proactively be conscious to start doing.
Right.
Yeah.
Let me write on a little bit for that, because I think society, we often feel like we are accommodating for the minority. Like they're so inconvenient, they're so, okay, there's something wrong, but then we all must accommodate. But let me tell you something that is lesser known. They have imbibed all these messages, so they totally feel like they have something wrong, and you are talking about young people, even adults, grown men and women who, because at that time when we were younger, there wasn't a diagnosis. So many people are now coming and realizing, hey, there is something. I probably grew up with a learning need. I may have ADHD, and I really think there's something wrong with me. But because they didn't have a label, they just said, I must then be dumb. Okay, I must then be stupid, like the way people are saying to me. They are imbibing all of society's accusations and saying, you are all right. I am inconveniencing you. I am just a bummer. I am, there's no use. That's why you have a very high incidence of anxiety, right, of depression, and the worse ones, suicide ideation, self-harm, isolation, things like that, because they really believe society's messages. So that's why society has to be the one to change, because those are wrong messages, right? I mean, yes, we have all sorts of things like allergies, cancer, and all of that, but we don't make people who are suffering it feel like they deserve it. So in the same way with the special needs environment, all the more, because they're so sensitive to these messages, and they're actually agreeing with the messages, we have to change the messaging, and start to tell them, you have a lot of strengths, and it's really okay that you are struggling, because you may struggle with that. I may struggle with something else like allergies or, a medical condition, diabetes, high blood pressure, and I have to take my meds, I have to take whatever, and you may have certain other issues, but you have so many other strengths as well. So I think society needs to start.
I so love where you come from. In fact, I was very, very moved, because I can't imagine how it is like to live life thinking I'm a misfit, or I am something wrong with me. Or
There are many studies showing inmates
in prison,
who are actually undiagnosed
that's right,
ADHD or something like that.
I understand, like, you know, because society was not accepting, and then by mainstream law, they are in prison. But I'm just wondering, if I had, you know, a certain disability, I can't imagine my whole life, I feel like I inconvenience my parents. I feel like I'm a liability. I can't imagine how that is like to live life. You know, so I think, thank you for bringing not just the perspective of how society views, but even can we get an insight to how they feel? Because nobody wants to feel like I'm a letdown, or I'm a failure, or I'm not good enough, or there's something I did wrong. So thank you, and let's practice a lot more compassion and empathy when we connect with these people, to celebrate them. You know, I mean, that's something that keeps coming up a lot, because I may not understand you, but just like friends, right? First time we meet, I get to know you for who you are as a person, not with labels of, you know, disability. And so now if we move on to actions, what are certain actions that we can do? So I want to continue with Debbie, because we've got a question, lifestyle actions. What can we eat more to cause the inflammation, whether in my gut or my brain, to be reduced?
Okay, so not all food are created the same. Okay. There are some food that definitely will cause more inflammation. There are some food that definitely will reduce the inflammation. So parents need to be very smart when you are choosing what kind of food that your child can consume. So some food definitely that cause inflammation. There are three things, the three big ones that is causing inflammation. First is sugar. I think everyone knows this, but everyone's giving their kids treats with sugar. You know that when we think of sugar as a very inflammatory thing, you will not actually give treats to your children or associate celebration with sugar, because this is something that what the majority of people doing, and these are not good.
It doesn't serve them.
It doesn't serve them, and they will feel that you are mistreating them if you don't give them that sweet treat, that ice cream, that cake, that candy, that chocolate, you know?
Actually it fuels their condition.
Yes. And many parents who are under my care, they keep coming to me, I feel so bad for my child because I can't give them this and that. I can't give them this M&M chocolate. I was like, oh!
Actually, why be right to say, right? It's just for a period. As in, just allow the body to heal, to me, because once inflammation is under control or subdued, then how do I say?
Firstly, it's not easy to reverse the situation. So you really need to be very, very aware about all these things. Okay, so first is sugar. Second is wheat or gluten. And third, gluten is, you know, wheat. You can find it in pasta, in your Big Mac. It's in your noodles, in your cake, in all the goodies, in bread. You know, everyone. Some people can't live without bread. And the third one is dairy. Dairy has casein and it's very inflammatory as well. And we have been conditioned that you can't grow well if you don't drink milk.
Not true.
Not true. Not true. So what happens is that all these three things always comes together in cakes, you know, in all the treats that we are giving our kids.
And we wonder why they're jumping higher.
And you wonder why after that they can't concentrate. You wonder after their recess and the kids come back and then they like totally out of this world because they were taking Milo and then they were having all this bread and all these things during recess, because we have no awareness.
So
our society have no awareness of this.
How long should we try to remove as much as possible these food types from their diet?
So the thing is that it's quite difficult to remove the gluten. The gluten might stay about 8 months in your body. And some kids, they become so sensitive and having withdrawal symptoms. They will start eating things that, especially for autistic kids, they will even eat your lipstick because there's gluten there.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they will start seeking even things, because it's actually what happened is that in certain kids with susceptibility in their gut, all these substance, when they actually can enter the blood as gluteomorphine or as casomorphine if it's casein, which is dairy, and actually the name morphine itself can tell you it's a morphine-like substance. It's a drug, and sugar as well. So all these three things, they are so addictive. You felt that your life is not complete without them.
Okay. Thank you for giving us so much insight into the chemistry of it and how by actually little lifestyle adjustments to our diet. And I want to assert that it's not just for children with special needs. I think for all of us,
For everyone.
our health can improve as we choose to take lesser gluten,
Yes.
wheat, gluten, wheat, sugar, and dairy products.
My husband is a Hainanese, and he loves his kaya bread, and he loves his milk, his Hainanese milk tea. And when we started on this diet in our house, okay, so he's also, in a way, is quite angmoh. He loves his baguette and he loves his butter.
So what do you have to do to change that?
So when we remove it from the house, he
Withdrawal
was like,
symptoms.
He have all the withdrawal symptoms. But later on, many years down the line, when we actually did a DNA test on him, we found out that in his DNA, there is a lot of susceptibility to gluten and casein. So it was a great move to actually remove it earlier on, that he was not really exposed to it at home, at least. I mean, outside it's
But at least we have one environment where it serves us.
Exactly.
Yeah? And the home is something we can control, right? So let's do that. I love what you're saying, because what comes to mind, right, is in me, if I just change my eating habits, I can change my DNA almost. Can you imagine the benefit, the different DNA genes that I would then pass on to the next generation?
Yeah, so the DNA has the areas that it is not expressed, and there's areas that's expressed. There is new knowledge now about epigenetic, all the genes that we express. So it has a lot to do with what we eat, how we expose ourselves, how much kind words you give me. These are those things that actually really influence our makeup, our total health.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that, because I think it's common knowledge that stress does imprint on the skin, on the body, right, into our cells. But for it to be imbued so deeply into our DNA and then to impact the next generation, I mean, that's really food for thought for why I choose to be kind. I choose and choose and choose. It really alters my DNA, in fact.
Yes, exactly.
Wonderful. Thank you, Debbie. And Su-LYNN, I want to ask you, I think in Singapore, the truth is studies are the priority. So if my child has a learning disability, frown on and made to feel lousy. I think what I want to talk about is the self-esteem of the child. How can parents come in to support the self-esteem and tell the child, you're not your grades. You are bigger beyond that.
Exactly. So I think this follows very, very smoothly after what Dr. Debbie mentioned about kind words, right? Yeah. So it's really about praising. And what do we praise about, right? So, I mean, I think it's something that it's not a very new idea actually, but it's really about praising not the outcome, but really about the effort of the child. For a child with learning disorders, special needs, they're already struggling so much in school. They're probably putting a lot more effort than anybody else around them to produce the same amount of work, the same quality of work. So that in itself is the effort that as parents, we should be validating them, right? I think we can never validate too little. What kids really need is that validation, and that that want or the desire to know, right, that you are also understanding of their condition. And with that, they will feel very safe also about sharing with you what their difficulties really are. It's creating this safe space that will definitely lead on to them feeling less stressed also, right? And the more we validate them for their efforts, right, they're going to know that, okay, my ability is not tied to my outcome. It's about the process that I took. I put in my effort. These are qualities that we want the child, right, to be inculcated with. Qualities that are not measurable actually by grades, right? So it's about kindness, compassion, and it really starts off with how parents actually treat their child.
Yeah, wonderful. I love what you're saying, because it's really about the growth mindset where the focus is not on the outcome, but the process, and to enjoy the process, and to, I think, what I'm hearing, appreciate their effort. Like, hey, you did this, so well done. And instead of being focused on, I'm not going to say anything until you reach this standard. And then, my goodness, how many steps will it? But if, they just hear, wow, guess what? You did this. Congratulations.
That's right. And I mean, also adding on what Tina mentioned, right, about many individuals along the way in their lives, they were not identified earlier. So they've been coping with, or rather they have been like taking all in, all the negative comments that others have made for them. But it's really about them. I mean, they have put in so much effort. A lot of them have actually found different ways to cope with their difficulties. So I do also see adults coming in suspecting themselves of having autism or ADHD. And the reason why they have been able to, thrive so far is also because they're smart enough, right? And then with the right environment, with the right support at home, they're able to cope quite well with their own needs. But at the same time, now they're also questioning certain things. So I think it's really, it's really about that again to that praising of effort in the whole entire process.
I love what you're sharing. And in closing, right, I want to bring up resilience, right? How do we teach our children at home how to be less impacted, to not allow others' reactions to affect them? Because the reality is, I don't just live within the four walls. I would have some point to go out. And then how do we build that resilience within them to be less, to buffer them from the expectations of others? Tina?
I think that's always the toughest, resilience is because it's allowing them to fail and allowing them to learn from their mistakes. And then it's a long journey. It's not like when they first fail and then suddenly they go, okay, I can do it again. Then you're like, oh, wow, you're so resilient. Sometimes it's the battering, right? Like the repeat battering. And I think an interesting thing about ADHD, they're very similar to the autism spectrum children. There's almost a very complete overlap in symptoms, actually. They actually don't quite care, so to speak, what other people think or perceive of them. But they are the ones that then, because they've imbibed the negative talk, they tell themselves they are really lousy. So even when they face failure, they go, I deserve it, because I didn't do good enough anyway, I blah, blah, blah. So I think it's very, very tricky. I mean, as much as parents and society needs to affirm, like they say, right, one criticism, you need about 10 praises to outweigh that and cancel out. Imagine what society has done, on a larger scale, on a macro scale. That's why as much as what we can do externally to send in those positive messages, I think it will really help them to know that it's okay. And even if I'm recovering, I'm taking those baby steps out of my failure and I'm still bumbling through decisions. It's okay because the successful people do that too, but they think, no, only I go through that,
Wonderful. So,
many people have this notion that parents, you need to be the person who teach your children the world is a harsh place. So, no, the thing is that the children, they are like little buds. They need to stay in the ground. They need to grow in the ground that is highly fertile. In order for them later to grow into a big tall tree, they need to go through this part in life whereby they are growing as a little sapling. And we need to put all nutrition we can into that. We need to appreciate them, notice all the little effort that they do. Because without that acknowledgement, they will grow up thinking that there is something wrong with them.
I so love the trajectory you point out, right? Because very often you imagine a big oak tree, hit, it's resilient already. But the small seedling, too little water, wither immediately. And yet, when will we recognize the privilege that we have as parents to nurture these seedlings into one day being a huge tree to then be a contribution, So as we bring this to a close, what is one last actionable tip you want to leave parents with?
All right, I would say, it's that one tip would be as parents to really take care of yourself, because I think all too often, definitely you'll be putting your child's needs before yours, right? But at the same time, you have to give, in order to even give someone else the compassion and to hold space for your child, it actually comes back again to how much compassionate we are towards ourselves, right? And the space that we give to ourselves to take care of our own needs. I mean, only when we are able to regulate ourselves and to be in a calm space, then can we provide that support that our child needs. So yes, I really feel that self-care is really very important, and also reaching out for support, whether it's support from other parents in the same situation as you are in, or even family and friends, school and teachers as well.
Wonderful. I love what you say. Instead of, parents, remember self-love. Wonderful. Thank you, SU-LYNN. Tina,
Yes, I think going off from what SU-LYNN just said, having peer support is really important, because when you're on a journey that's very unique, you have children that are different from everyone else. Sometimes you always blame your own parenting. Yeah, so having peer support, I mean, the group that I'm with, Spark, we have peer support groups for parents. We're also starting for educators, adult ADHD, and all of that. There's also a new movement called Unlocking ADHD, and they're also trying to do peer support groups. So wherever you can get it, try to link up, because that's the last thing you think you need. You want to send your child off for therapy, for everything, but you forget that you need the support as well. And you find that with that support, you are able to have the growth mindset. You're able to cry together, laugh together, go through the pain and struggle together, but learn together. And I think that would help make the journey a lot more manageable.
Wow, I so love this. First, you start with yourself, self-love, and then increase the support to others around me. Debbie, do you have anything
Okay,
to
so
say?
SU-LYNN and Tina basically have taken a lot of things that I want to say. For everything that you've gone through, you need to be able to acknowledge what really happens. After you acknowledge it, you need to be able to say to yourself, okay, I might not know what I need to do, but there must be people out there who knows. Go and ask for help. These are the things that parents need to understand, because you might have difficulty on doing it on your own. For myself, I grew to be the person who I am today because I openly went to seek and beg for people for help. So I wish that you can just set aside your own fear of unknown and just step out and say that, okay, I will seek help because this is so important for my child and for myself.
I love how you've actually expanded the concentric circle. So it's not just starting with me, my family that support people who can identify with what I'm going through, but even people I don't yet know, so that I do not have to settle for what the experts tell me. But there is a different outcome because I choose to push beyond the boundaries of what I know, right? So that's wonderful. And with that, thank you so much for taking time to listen to this wonderful discussion on how, as individuals, we can begin to catalyze change wherever we are, whether in our own lives individually, in our family, or even society at large. We may not have the immediate experience of having a child with special needs or even a relative, and we don't need it. We don't need any reasons or excuses to be a lot more gracious, to be a lot more accepting and kind. Bye!
Bye.
Bye.
I've got this Stabilo Easy Ergo left-hander pencil for my boy. My son is 4 years, 3 months old. When he picked up the pencil, he basically just put his thumb, index finger and middle finger right on it without me telling him how to do it. With this new pencil, he can write better and also his strokes are much clearer. I actually like the pencil really much because it's break resistant, like when he drops it, the lead doesn't break. Less tiring for him to write so that he can write for a longer time.